Hey guys, it's Chris at the Ultimate Recycler. I'm in my workshop at home and this is part 2 of a repair job on this Sansui tuner or receiver amplifier. Now in part 1 we showed you, I picked this up in the e-waste. We did a few basic checks and decided after a look on eBay that it was worth too good to scrap. It was worth trying to get going. A nice vintage unit. Turned out to be a 1982 era, and Sansui are a good, nice brand. So we did a few tests. We found that the switch was dodgy, and I've still got a test lead just across the switch because we actually found there was another problem, and I was all set to pull out the main amplifier board and start testing capacitors because we had a very quiet sound on both channels and no real amplification. Now I've just done a little bit of a check before I've got to that stage of a major pull the board out type job. I thought, well, we'd only really tried the radio, so we better plug something else into one of the inputs and just make sure that it is in the amplifier section, and I'm glad I did. And it's probably a good practice to go through this because I've just got a CD player here that I've actually got running, and I've plugged it into the auxiliary input, and I then selected auxiliary on the options here. Oops. And it plays quite well. We've got good volume, so that's good news. Now when I did push that button, I found that I pushed the radio button, which I've just done then, and the radio come on much better. So I started fiddling with these buttons a little bit, and they were very crackly and staticky. They've actually, you can probably hear that a bit. They've come good a bit now because I've been pressing them in and out. But basically, our issue is purely just dirt in the contacts, dirty switches. The inside is rather grubby. It's been sitting around for a long time. And I also found when I was putting in the input plugs into the back that there was some crackling as well, and I thought, well, it's possible that those input jacks, because they're soldered straight onto the board, sometimes you can get a bad solder join there and eventually they crack. So it turns out that our problem's probably only the switches and maybe a dodgy contact at the back, and not an amplifier problem, and all the capacitors are still performing okay. Now there's no doubt that they're getting old, and a full restoration probably should be done at some stage. I'm not going to go to that trouble at this stage. I just want to get the thing going, and then I'll probably sell it, and someone that's right into these things will probably take it on as a project down the track. But it sounds like it's going to be quite usable. It sounds pretty good through my cheap workshop speakers. So I'm going to pull that board out, which is the receiver board, and it has the selector switches on the front there, and it has the input jacks on the back. So I'll pull that board out and we'll clean up all the contacts, and that should fix our problems. And then we have to go back to our initial problem, which was this switch. And rather than order a new one, I'm wondering if I could even take it apart and maybe get a bit of contact cleaner in there, because it may well come good. When I first tried it, it flickered a lot, but I think it actually did come on at one stage a little bit kind of more securely, and then it dropped out again. So possibly the whole unit really doesn't need any parts. It just needs a really good cleanup on the contacts. So we'll pull that board out now and we'll try and clean them all up. Alright, we're going to shorten this repair job up quite a bit because I took the bottom panel off this unit and turned it upside down, and we've got really good access to this circuit board. And I could get under the edge here with the soldering iron, and I've resoldered all these terminals. I've just melted them and fed a little bit of extra solder onto all those terminals where the bottom connector blocks go on. So that's the only one that actually solders direct into the circuit board. The other ones have a bracket running up the side inside the panel there, and they'll be fine. I think these weren't the only ones that were a bit crackly, so that should have fixed that problem. So we're avoiding taking that board out because, well, I think the big problem will be the tuning string. I'll turn it back over and show you. So as you can see, the string goes around that's a weight there at the back of the tuning, and it does laps around pulleys and back across the inside of the dial, and then has lots of little pulleys to bring it back over to the tuning capacitor. Not that it's an insurmountable problem, it just would create a lot more labour on a job that probably isn't necessary. I've got pretty good access to the back of those switches from under the front panel and from the back here, and I've squirted a bit of contact cleaner in them, and I've just worked the switches in and out for a fair bit. So I think that'll probably fix the problem. There's no sense spending a couple of hours on it when really I'm only going to sell it anyway, and I think that will be ample to get it operational and to keep it fairly reliable, at least in at least for quite some time. As I said, it's going to need a full resto at some stage anyway, as those electrolytic capacitors get older and gradually break down. So I think now I'll tackle the main switch, and we'll give it a bit of a test, and hopefully that's all we need with this repair, and we can start putting it back together. So I've unsoldered the mains wires from the board that holds the switch, and I'm going to take the switch off the board. So I've unsoldered the joints, and for those of you that don't do much with this sort of work, I have what we call a solder sucker, and it's a matter of charging this up. It's spring loaded, and we melt the solder on the contacts, and sometimes I'll feed a little bit of extra solder in there just to give a good blob, and once it's melted we put the tip there, push the button, and it basically sucks the molten solder away from the joint, and it works very well, and that way it frees up all the terminals, and the switch is actually a bit loose now, so it should be able to pull out of that board. And then we'll have a look. We'll try and get it apart so that we can give it a proper clean. So all those terminals are loose. I can wobble the switch, and I've all got them all fairly clean, so we should be able to just gently pry it through the board. There we go, that's going to come off nicely. I think there's just one little tight. It's always difficult to unsolder something that has lots of legs on it. There we go, no damage done, and now we can have a look at getting into the switch. Looks like we might be able to take that white plastic cover off. I've just got to clean up a little bit of solder on that terminal, and it might just slip off and we'll get access to the insides of the switch, or at least be able to get some contact cleaner in there. Okay, bit of a hiccup. The white plastic cover over the switch was very brittle, and it pretty much just fell apart. You can see from the back of that one of the terminals has been arcing quite badly, and it is evident, and I think I can probably zoom in on this piece here. It is evident that terminal is really badly pitted and probably about half the size that it used to be, whereas the other one, which was unused, is nice and shiny. But because the cover's broken off, the terminal on this side, on the other side, is almost non-existent, so it's been playing up for some time, and contact cleaner was certainly not going to fix that. So I'm going to find myself another switch, but now that I know the rest of the unit works well, that's not a problem. I'll get another switch for it, and then we'll be rocking and rolling. So I'm back in my shed tonight, having another look at this switch. I did find some online, but the cheapest I found was about 35 Australian dollars, and it was in the US, and I was looking at another $30 postage, so I really didn't want to pay that sort of money for a switch. I did find a second-hand one on eBay, but the guy still wanted $29 or something, plus there was postage involved, and there's no guarantees that a second-hand one's going to be any better than this one. So what I'm going to do, I've actually got the part of the switch mechanism back together. It's fortunate that this one just has a couple of rollers. They're a little bit fiddly to get in, but I've got them in. And the actual contacts, well, if you remember that I said one side wasn't used, so that's this side over there. That terminal's still very good, and the corresponding terminal on the spring steel bit was fine. So I'm going to put it back together and actually then link those two connectors and basically use the other half of the switch that wasn't used, and I think that should work fine. The rest of it seems alright. We have the issue, of course, of the broken cover, but I think that still will glue back okay. It is a bit brittle, but I think it'll still glue back on. It's really only the top piece that kind of holds the workings together. And I'm sure, look, it's worth a go. It's no harm lost if it doesn't work. And if it does, well, it saves me about $60, and it means I can get this project back finished sooner. Because there's no telling how long it would take to get a package out of the States at the moment, with the pandemic still raging around the world. So, all right, I'll put my steady hands on, lower my magnifying glass lamp here, and have a bit of a fiddle. Now I'll give you a look at this mechanism. I've got it back together, and if the camera will focus through the magnifying lamp and I can see what I'm doing, and hopefully things don't fly everywhere. You can see how that mechanism works there. So it's the one on the left was badly pitted. So that's on. They're both going to still connect, but we won't actually have one of the terminals on the left-hand side connected because I don't want it to continue to arc. I don't think running it through both switches would be wise. So there we go, the one on the right should be pretty much as a new switch. So now I just have to glue the plastic back together. Hopefully it clicks together kind of nicely and makes a nice neat job. And then we can reinstall our switch. And now the good news, I clipped the top back on. The top part of that switch, I haven't got the sides on yet, and they're the bits that are broken around the sides. But the top actually clipped back on very firmly. The clip parts were still undamaged. So with a little bit of thumb pressure, it actually locked into place really nicely. I will grab some super glue and just glue the sides back on around the edges of that white piece, just to make sure it's all secure and complete and can't come off with a knock or anything. The switch pretty well, if it ever plays up again, it definitely will need replacing. And I did have the leads on the other side, which was the operational side, and we still had a dodgy connection. It wouldn't connect most times because you saw how pitted the contacts were. And on this side, it's working beautifully. That's on and that's off. So functional, should do the trick nicely. Saved myself about $60, and all we need to do is grab the super glue tomorrow, and tomorrow night I should be able to glue it up. Then we can solder it back in. Now we will have to put a link, of course, because on the back of this little circuit board, you can see just right next to my thumbnail there, that's the side of the switch that used to work, and these other terminals just go through the board, and there's actually no solder tracks there. So I'll have to just run a link across either underneath on the board or across the top of the switch. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with that. Good job. All right, I'll see you soon. Okay, back in the workshop tonight. I've just pushed the switch into the circuit board. You can see all the terminals are poking through here. And we've got, I've glued the back panels on the switch, or the side panels. I'll show you those in a minute. So we'll just solder back these joints, how they were. And the other ones we will also solder in how they were. These two aren't actually soldered, but these are the two we're going to be using this time. So I'll solder these two back in because it gives the switch some stability, and it needs to be solidly attached to the little board because it all has to hold together. And there we have the little switch fuse board assembled. Switch went back on. You can see how the cover's glued on, alright, that white shroud. It's really only the top part clipped on quite firmly, as I mentioned. The side ones really only, it's just a matter of making it look complete. They don't serve any real purpose. And they glued on okay, they look neat enough. Now you'll see that I've soldered a link across here. So these terminals were the ones that were being used, and the switch just joins those two. That back terminal now doesn't connect to anything. The little patch underneath the circuit board doesn't go anywhere. So we've linked this one across, and we've soldered the wire back on here. So the switch will join these two, power in, join to here when the switch is on. It'll track across this link, down through that pin and into the circuit, where it comes back up through this fuse, and then the white wire is power out. So we've managed to salvage the switch, which I'm pretty happy with. It's pretty much all back in there now. We just have to put the rest of the unit together and give it a test. And here we go. I'm just sitting back and enjoying the satisfaction of finishing a job. I've given it a quick run, runs beautifully, I'll show you in a tick. And I've just spent the last 20 minutes just cleaning up the front panel, remembering it had all those marks over it. I just used a bit of metho on a rag and wiped all the knobs down, and yeah, she's come up sparkling. The top is a little bit, oh, it's better than what it was. It's a little bit marked, and I did get most of those marks off that were the old radio stations someone had written there in Texter. If I was going to do a total proper restoration, I'd probably even repaint that top panel. But the rest of it's come up fantastic. I quite like the brushed aluminium look from the sort of early 80s era. So let's turn it on. Our revamped switch works beautifully. She powers up nicely. Now at the moment it's on phono. Let's go to FM. Give it some volume. And we're on, that might be too much volume. We're on stereo, and which actually quietens the band until it finds a loud station. So if we take the stereo off, we can hear the FM hiss. And there's a station there. And the stereo mechanism, stereo circuits work well. But anyway, that all works well. If we go to AM, it's got the internal loop antenna, which works fine. And we can pick up plenty of stations there. I was scrolling up and down the band before. There's not a lot on AM around here, especially with only just the internal antenna. But she works well, and I've got a CD playing through the auxiliary at the moment. And we've got really nice sound. They're only my cheap workshop speakers, but it sounds awesome. Although perhaps this particular track isn't that impressive. But she all works well, both channels. No problems at all. The treble, the bass, beautiful. Very happy with this. We'll turn that back off. It's a really nice unit, and it's performing beautifully. It looks the part, and yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this repair job. As I said at the start of the video, it could have been a scrap out job, but I probably wouldn't have, because vintage hi-fi gear like this has got to be worth, well, as you saw with my search online, you know, people are looking for parts for them all the time. So what turned out to be, we didn't really know at the start of this video, has ended up with a really nice vintage hi-fi unit. I'll probably sell it in my shop, although when I fix these things, I love playing them, and I'm tempted to keep them, but you can't keep everything. As for value, look, I could put maybe 150 on it. I could maybe try it on eBay. Not sure, I'll decide that down the track. But thanks for sharing this adventure with me. If you'd like to see more of these sort of videos, let me know. I'm just loving the fact that I can save things from landfill. You know, can you believe this was thrown out? Admittedly, it had faults and it was a bit grotty, but look at it now. It's such a satisfying feeling to bring these back from the dead. So thanks for watching. Give us some feedback, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.